Nicola Sturgeon has been told the SNP cannot be trusted to run an independent Scotland because of the government's abysmal track record, which has left it responsible for the serious problems it has caused. Nicola Sturgeon is continuing her relentless push to force a second referendum on Scottish independence, just 5.5 years after the country rejected breaking free from the United Kingdom. The SNP has continued to launch scathing attacks against Boris Johnson over his continued rejections of a second referendum, with Ms Sturgeon raging the UK's departure from the EU has happened against the wishes of the Scottish people. The SNP enjoyed huge success in December's general election, gaining 13 seats in Scotland to take its total to 48, while the Conservatives and Labour lost 7 and 6 seats. But, political experts have warned the party's electoral victories over recent years should be taken with a pinch of salt, as they have developed a miserable track record in dealing with issues closer to home that Scottish voters are yet to fully realise. David Duguid, the Scottish Conservative MP for Banff and Buchan, told Express.co.uk, the SNP government is failing miserably on domestic issues. There are NHS treatment time targets that have never been met, we have the highest rate of drug deaths in Europe and an education system that is slipping down the world rankings. Why should we believe that the SNP would do any better running an independent country? On an electoral level, there is no denying that the SNP has been very successful, but their record in government is nothing short of abysmal. There is no reason why Scotland cannot thrive, as it has done in the past, as part of the United Kingdom. We are stronger and better off together. Elliot Wilson, a former clerk of the House of Commons Scottish Affairs Committee, said the SNP has succeeded in positioning themselves as the champions of independence to the exclusion of almost everything else. But he warned, the SNP have certainly been successful in positioning themselves as the champions of independence to the exclusion of almost everything else. They are the party of hope, of a better future. They now have a record in government on which they can be judged, and in terms of health care and education, there are serious problems for which they can be held responsible, but voters don't seem to have caught on to that yet. Patrick Sullivan, founder of the Westminster think tank Parliament Street, referenced Scotland's huge debt pile to highlight the government's miserable track record. Financial figures from the Scottish government showed an independent country would fail the European Union membership entrance test. The latest GDP quarterly national accounts for Scotland shows the difference between in-tax income and public spending had risen from 7% to 7.2% of GDP. The deficit remained relatively stable at £12.6 billion, but the Scottish economy actually shrunk 3% from £180 billion to £175 billion, meaning it actually grew in percentage terms. The latest report from the Scottish Fiscal Commission has predicted GDP will increase by 1% this financial year, rising to 1.1% next year and 1.2% in 2022-23. But the report from the SFC warned Brexit negotiations and uncertainty over the timing and nature of the UK's departure from the EU has resulted in subdued growth over the last year. It added now the UK has left the EU, the unwinding of some Brexit-related uncertainty may support some additional growth, but the SFC said Brexit remains a risk to continued economic growth. Mr. Sullivan said, in terms of what has actually been achieved from a policy perspective, the SNP has a miserable track record. One only has to look at the state of the Scottish debt pile to understand that independence is nothing more than something to cover up for the nation's long-standing economic inadequacies. Dr. Steve McCabe, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University, highlighted the SNP's failure to address the education crisis as a reason it should be first focusing on matters closer to home. The latest education report in December showed England outstripping Scotland in the core subjects of reading, maths and science. The PISA survey is run every 3 years by the OECD. Computer-based tests were carried out, with a 2-hour assessment for the 600,000 students in 79 countries and territories. In Scotland, 2,969 pupils from 107 secondary schools participated in the study, which uses a point-based system to reflect performance. Scotland also dropped down the league tables to joint 16th for reading, joint 30th for science and 31st for maths. Dr. McCabe data gleaned from the Programme for International Student Assessment (PISA) test shows Scottish education is not achieving the transformation that would be expected. Lindsay Patterson, professor of education at Edinburgh University, claimed recently that the educational system in Scotland is stagnating in mediocrity. There are embedded social problems resulting from unemployment and substandard housing. These in turn have led to poor life expectancy in Scotland's cities and major towns. The SNP wish to be judged as a party that can create a free Scotland. However, for the majority of people what matter most are the things they experience on a daily basis and ensuring that their children can look forward to a better future. An SNP spokesman told Express.co.uk, latest opinion polls showed that a majority of Scots now back independence, and the SNP retain an overwhelming lead over our political opponents, precisely because of our strong record in government and our vision for an independent Scotland.